Hi, it's Mike here at Music Villa. Thanks for tuning in. Last week we did chord scales part 2, where we covered pretty exclusively from the last 2 videos how to play chords over any given key, diatonic scale. So now, as promised, I want to talk about how do we solo over these chords. So the first thing to think about is that remember that these chords that we created came from the major scale. So all of the notes in all of those chords are notes from the major scale. We call those scale tones. When we create a chord, then, we're actually playing the notes from the scale to create that chord. And when we do that, each note then becomes what we call a chord tone. That's an important concept to remember. The difference between a chord tone and the scale tones. So we're in the key of G, so let's stay there. So here's key of G. So if I play the scale, I have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Those are all scale tones. When I play the chord, I'm going to play the root of the chord in question, in this case G, and I'm going to skip every other note to identify the chord tones. So in this case, G would be G, B, and D. So I skipped over A, I played B, I skipped over C, and I played D. That gives me the root, the third, and the fifth. G, B, D. So I would do that for every degree through the scale and on the chord tone. So the next chord is A minor. So we would play A, C, E. That would be the chord tones. A, C, and E. We go to the next chord is B minor. Again, now we have the root B. Every other note gives us B, D, and F sharp. I'm going to run through them real quickly so you can see them all, but you get the idea. We're just playing the root and then every other note. So here's C, C, E, G. Here's D. So we have D, F sharp, A. And then we have E minor. So we have E, G, and B. And then we talked about the F sharp diminished chord actually being substituted by the dominant 5 chord, which would give us D, F sharp, A, and C. Okay, so all of those then are chord tones. So when we start playing through these changes, if you have a song that has a chord progression, let's just simplify it and say we're going to do a 1, 4, 5, our primary chords. G, C, and D. So all of those chords are comprised of notes from the G scale. So our sort of home base is to play the G scale when we're developing melodies and soloing over those changes. The problem that happens is that some people think, well, okay, I can just play the G major scale over that chord progression. If the chords are all part of the G major key, I can just play the G major scale. And in part, that's true. But what separates what really sounds good to what sounds okay? Why is it that you like a certain player and the sound that he or she delivers over, say, somebody else? And it's usually because it's the way that they address the changes when they're playing over it. And what do I mean by that is they know where the chord tones are. So if I'm playing that G, C, D progression over the G chord, I want to be able to know that G, B, and D are going to sound great because those are the chord tones. Any other note in the scale then is going to sound okay, but the chord tones are going to sound better. So here's the kicker. And if you learn anything, this is what you want to learn. Whenever you have a chord progression, and the chord progressions are moving through the song. In this case, we had G for a measure, C for a measure, and then D. Okay? Every time that chord changed from the G to the downbeat when the C chord came in to the downbeat when the D chord came in, on that downbeat, the top of the measure where the chord changes, you want to play a chord tone. After you play the chord tone, on the beat 1.5, 2, 3, and 4, you can play anything you want out of the G major scale. Just remember on the chord change, on the downbeat of that change, you want to play a chord tone. So you would have something like this then. So I didn't even play a chord, but you heard the chord progression because I addressed the chord tone when the chord was going to change. So if I had a backing track and that chord progression was going on, you could actually sort of be singing a melody and hear that chord progression. So you heard the chord progression and I never played a chord. And that's the idea. That's how you approach soloing over a chord progression, is by identifying the chord tones, playing the chord tones on the top of the measure when that chord changes, and then playing scale tones after you play that chord tone to develop your melody. This is something that you got to play around with for a little bit until you get the idea of how it works. And we're going to talk more about it in subsequent videos, but I wanted to introduce that to you here. So learn how to spell your chords. That's the most important thing, because if you don't know how to spell the chords, you don't know what the chord tones are. So do what I did in the beginning where I showed you how to spell the chords, and then find those notes all over the area that you're playing in, whether in this case I'm just playing an open G. Later we'll move up the neck and we'll play in closed scales. But right now, know where your chord tones are. Then take that progression and just target. It's what we call chord tone targeting. Target the chord tones, know where they are, and put them on the top of the beat when that chord changes. Now, the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more where we actually do chord tone targeting. In this particular video, I introduced you to the root. So I played G, and I noodled, then I played C, and I noodled, then I played D, and I noodled, and then I went back to G. So I was always playing the root. But chord tones are going to be the root, the third, and the fifth. So we're going to talk about how we can target the third, target the fifth, and really develop a solo, really begin to develop the idea of how to improvise over these chord changes. Start out slow. Start out with the G, C, and D, your primary chords. Later, we'll introduce the minor chords, but the same concept is in play. You just target the chord tones of any chord that shows up. So when you're looking at songs, you can even get a piece of sheet music and look at the melodies of the song, and I'll guarantee you that wherever the chord changes on that sheet music or in that song that you're learning, the melody note that's being played or being sung on the downbeat of that chord change is going to be a chord tone. If anybody finds that to be different, let me know, but I'm 99.9% sure that's what's happening in music. So anyways, there you go. So that's soloing over the chord changes, sort of part one. We'll talk more about that in the next video. So this is Mike here at Music Villa. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.